Welcome everybody to another episode brought to you by The Psychology Student. Today's episode is going to be a follow-up of the last one where we talked about how to give advice. If you haven't seen part one, definitely do so because I essentially laid out the foundation. Imagine I'm talking about how to throw a punch. And in this one, if I just talk about balling up your fist and touching someone's mouth with your knuckle, you got to listen to the first episode where I talk about the elbow, the rotation of the shoulder, the torque of the hip, the bent of the knees, pushing off the ground. What I mean to say is that one sets the foundations for this one. So, we've talked about in the earlier video about formulating the problem and recognizing what it is. And if we don't know, at least with about 99% certainty what the problem is, we do not want to give advice. That would be like misdiagnosing a problem, turning into a false positive, giving someone medication or therapy for something that they do not need. And not only does it not help them, but it can actually harm them. So, we imagine we're talking to this friend, this family member, this client, and we want to figure out what the problem is. And the way that we do this, again, touching back on the last video, is Carl Rogers' approach of, you tell me what the problem is. And then to make sure that I understood you correctly, I repeat that back to you. And when you say, yup, Daniel, you're right, that's exactly what it is, then we start to move forward. So, once we have the problem, the next question is, where do we go from here? This is really important. This person clearly has a problem, and they are sharing it with me. Here are two things that I want you to consider. Number one, did they start opening up to you? Like, were you sitting together and you're like, hey, how's it going? I'm doing pretty lousy. Oh, why is that? When they said they're doing pretty lousy, it shows that there's a transparency. They want to be clear about how they're feeling and they don't want to hide, which tells you something about this person might want to have a conversation. And it's a little bit like they're kind of throwing the hook to see how much you question further about it. Or is it really you going after it yourself? Maybe they don't even say anything. You just go after them and you go, hey, is everything okay? I just realized we haven't talked for a long time. I wanted to check in with you. Or maybe I thought something was up. Am I wrong? So you got to remember, are they kind of giving you a bait to talk to them? Or are you going after them yourselves? Maybe it's not very clear if they even want to talk at all. Once they formulate the problem, the question becomes, what is it that you're looking for? Are you looking for someone to listen? Because it does help. It really, really does. For people who say, oh, look, you can just sit there and think positive thoughts, now you've just met a liar. If someone looks at you in the eyes and says, if you're stressed, if you're anxious, just sit there and think positively, you've just met a liar. Folks, it's not that simple. The brain is too complex. You can't think yourself out of anxiety. You can't think yourself out of stress. And before people start throwing all these magazines at me and saying, well, this psychologist said this and this counselor says that, there's studies to show that when you're at the height of the anxiety or of the stress, one of the best things you could do is to talk to someone. Because, look, there's a joke about psychology students that says, you could never be in a bad mental health state. If you are, just check your notes, right? And the problem with that statement is, when it's you who's not doing well, it's hard to figure out what the factors are. When it's you who's in trouble, it's hard to diagnose yourself, but from the outside looking in, it's always easier. It's always easier to look at our outside as opposed to looking within. So keeping in mind, we can see how it can be harder for this individual to recognize what's going on with me, and a little bit easier maybe figuring out what's going on with other people, or so we think. So we know that talking to people is extremely helpful. A lot of times, someone doesn't even know what they want, and just by talking to someone else can make them feel better. This can be a friend, a family member. It could even be a stranger if it comes to it. So, you're talking to a person. What you should come to mind is, do they just want someone to listen? Or are they looking for advice? That's really important. And the way that you kind of pick this up is either indirectly, you listen to what they say, or you can flat out ask them. Your name is Josh. Hey Josh, I'm really glad that you opened up. And I'm more than happy to help you any way that I can. Now tell me, are you looking for someone to really listen and hear you out? Or are you looking for some advice? Now, you're asking them point blank, what do you need from me? We've opened up this conversation. We're already in here. What do you need? Because if I just jump over that line and I start giving advice, folks, how many of you have given advice to someone who didn't ask for it? What happened? Did they follow the advice? You might say, yes, Daniel, maybe they did. But I bet you the majority of the people who you give unsolicited advice to don't follow the advice. People would rather be wrong and have autonomy and make a choice themselves independently, then sometimes be right if someone else tells them to. And we see this especially in adolescence, 13, 14, with the development of the brain, recognizing that, oh, just because my mom says something, that doesn't mean that's the only way to go about it. Well, I'm a rebel, everyone sucks, I'm the coolest one. That's kind of where that starts. And in adulthood, we don't lose that necessarily. It might get less intense, but it definitely still exists. So we recognize before we even think, like when I call this video, How to Give Advice, I don't want you to just go, what's your problem? This is the advice. Because there's so much setup, there's so much foundation. And once you understand the problem, and once you talk to that person, and if they go, look, I just want someone to listen, the best thing you could do, in my opinion, is just to listen. And this is so hard. I cannot overstate how hard this is. When someone's telling you a problem, and the answer is so obvious in your head, but you have to bite your tongue. When my friend tells me that her boyfriend's done one or two shady things, but she's told me in advance that she doesn't want advice, she just wants someone to listen. And I have certain thoughts about that guy. And I'm biting my tongue because she doesn't want advice. It's very, very difficult because in your head, from a completely logical perspective, you want to save someone from further harm. And if you can say something that might save someone, you want to do it. So what do you do when the person says, I don't want advice? It's a very tricky spot to be in. And most people, and this was me a couple years ago, I used to say, if you complain, I said, don't complain. If there's a problem, come up with a solution. If you can't tell me, I'll help you come up with a solution, go do it. I don't want to hear it. That was literally my mindset. I was so anti-complain. I was so, if you're complaining, why? Complain doesn't do anything. It just ruins the mood. And it took me a couple of years to understand that sometimes the solution is just listening. And it makes people feel better. Now, there's an extreme. If you talk to your friend once and they say, I don't want advice, and they talk about a problem. Let's say we give the situation of the girl whose boyfriend is being unfaithful or shady or treating her poorly. And I don't say anything. Again, it's very hard to bite your tongue when you believe you have the correct answer and it's so obvious to you and it's not obvious to your friend. Over time, if you repeat this conversation, at some point you're just going to get tired. And it's totally okay. Do you know why? Because you are not a therapist. I do not like hearing people say, I'm the therapist of the group. Or, I'm the therapist in my friend's social circle. I hope that's not the case. Because in a therapeutic relationship, it is only one way. Meaning one person does all the talking and ranting, and the other person listens if you are the therapist. If you are the therapist, you do not start just disclosing stuff randomly. If you go to therapy and you say, look, I'm doing it in a pretty bad place. My parents are getting divorced and I just like to talk to someone about it. And then your therapist goes, well, look, now that you brought that up, my parents got divorced a couple years ago. I've been smoking cigarettes ever since. Plus, I'm getting into heroin. I'm not doing too well either. Like, that's not appropriate, right? So be careful when you say stuff like, oh, I'm the therapist for all my coworkers. Like, I don't believe that you're being fair to yourself. Regardless, that's neither here nor there. We want to understand, do you want advice or not? And if it's not, as hard as it is, zip it and just listen. If this person wants advice, and again, they might just want someone to listen to them and that'll make them feel better. Now, if someone does want advice, here's where it can get a little tricky. There's two ways to go about this. One way, well, look, there's several ways to go about this. Daniel teaches says there's only two ways and everyone else is wrong. There's two ways that are very surface level to go about this. Option number one is you still want to keep a level of autonomy and you provide them with several options. Okay, you give an example and you go, look, Daniel, I feel terrible because I'm tired all the time. And I go, well, tell me more about that. And you go, well, I'm tired all the time because I'm up late gaming. And then I'm gaming until 3 a.m. So I got to wake up early at 7 a.m. and I'm tired. Again, the immediate thing that most people do is we'll just stop gaming, right? Because that's the problem, or so we guess. But I don't assume, so I ask and I go, oh, interesting. Well, expand on that. Well, why do you game so late? Why not game like during the day? And he goes, well, during the day I don't have time. I'm doing homework all day. Oh, okay, interesting. So you do homework all day and you really want to game. So you're not going to go to sleep without gaming because you want to do something fun for you. So you stay up late to game, which causes you to wake up feeling tired. Am I understanding that correctly? You're double checking. They go, yeah, Daniel, that's exactly what's going on. So now if I say don't game, gaming is not the problem. The symptoms of this problem are you're tired. Why are you tired? Because you're gaming. Why are you gaming? You're gaming because you work so hard when you're awake during the day that you don't have any you time. So at night, actually Google this. This is called revenge bedtime procrastination or something like that. It's when people who are very, very into their work, they don't take enough time out for themselves during the day, and at night to like rebel, they'll just start doing what they want to do, which might be okay, but the consequences are lack of sleep. So you wake up the next day, you're not as sharp. Now you get less work done. You're going to have a decrease in your overall work quality. And whatever you do, your conversations are going to be more tired. Your workouts, you're not going to be able to push as much because we know sleep plays a huge role in muscle recovery. Also memorization if you're learning something new. So it's got a lot of different variables. Now the question here becomes, does this individual want advice or no? If no, again, people are going to sit here, and this is why most people aren't counselors. They're going to think, dude, this guy's an idiot. He needs to stop gaming. What, you're 25? Like, that's reason enough to stop gaming for some people. So I'm just going to tell you that that's what you should do, right? And that's one way to approach it. Another way to approach it is, if this person says they don't want advice, I'll just listen. And I'll say, man, yeah, you're really in a pickle. I mean, you have to work, and you spend all your time working. So the one time that you do have free from like 11 p.m. until 2 a.m., of course you want to play video games. Like, it makes 100% sense. Because if you don't play video games, like, you might as well just be a slave to your work. And that's not a life that you want to live. So video games is actually what keeps your head on your shoulders. It's the one fun thing that you do in 24 hours. I get it. You empathize, you sympathize, you say, look, this is why you're doing what you're doing. It's actually extremely logical. Like, it makes 100% sense why you do that. You know, and naturally you're going to have those consequences. So that's one. Now, if they say, I want advice, there's two ways to go about it. Number one is, you can either give a couple of options. You can go, okay, well, look, can I give you some advice? Can I give you some feedback? All right, well, from where I'm standing, here are a couple things that come to mind. You tell me what you think about these things. One possibility that you could do is, is there any way that you could start your job later on in the day? So maybe you can game till 3, but instead of waking up at 7, maybe is there any way you could even wake up at 8 or wake up at 9? Could you change that around? How flexible is your work? That could be a possibility. What do you think about that? Oh, that's not possible? It's very strict, this to this? Okay, understood. Let's cross that off. What about a possibility of putting in small breaks in between your work time? Like, what if you scheduled in like between 2 p.m. and 3:30 p.m.? Like, that's your gaming time, like for a fact, and no email, no call, no work is going to get in between that. And maybe if you game throughout the day, then you might not game at night. And then maybe they go, yeah, that sounds great. Or maybe they go, no, man, that's not good enough. And then you can offer up another solution. Now, you see where I'm going with this. Eventually, you might go to a place where they might deny everything that you're saying. To which you can fall into a position of, well, what do you think is the best approach? And they go, I don't know. That's why I came to see you. And this is why counseling could take a long time. People are not happy with the predicament that they're in. So they come to you for help, for an easy answer. You start giving them solutions, but they reject solution A through G. And then when you go, okay, look, man, I've given you all these solutions. You've rejected all of them. What do you think we should do? They go, I don't know. I came to see you. You're the expert. It's like, you rejected everything that I said. This is why counseling can take a long time. Because people fall in this weird contradictory stage where they don't like where they're at, but it's not bad enough to motivate change. A very simple way to think about changing our lives, changing our habits is, if the pros outweigh the cons, that gets us to do an action. Like, you know what? Feeling tired sucks when I stay up till 3 a.m. gaming and then waking up at 7. That's terrible. But it's worth it because I get to game at night. Now let's say this gentleman has a girlfriend. And he goes, look, during the day I'm tired. I don't see my girlfriend enough. She's getting really upset. Like, she's being really, really upset, and indirectly has said, like, this isn't a person I want to be in a relationship with. Now what's the pros and cons? Now the con isn't just, oh, I'm a little bit more tired, I have more headaches. The con is, I might lose my relationship. Is gaming 3 to 4 hours worth losing my relationship? So what you oftentimes do is you try to change the way an individual looks at a situation. You try to change the way that they balance their scale of pros and cons. And they might be in a place where they go, look, I didn't like her that much anyway. Like, that's his choice. That's his decision to undergo. But it's important that we fully recognize the consequences of our actions. For example, a gentleman was going to a psychiatrist and he was talking about, I want to quit smoking. And the guy said, well, look, you know that smoking's terrible for your health. You're going to die 10 to 20 years sooner. And he goes, yeah, I don't really care. And he goes, well, look, you know, smoking does all this stuff to your lungs, and you're not going to, if you go upstairs, you're going to be tired faster. He goes, yeah, I don't really care. And eventually, over talking and talking, they start talking about, hey, so-and-so, you've got a daughter, right? And the client says, yeah, I do. He goes, wouldn't it be nice to see her get married? And he goes, yeah, it would be. And the psychiatrist goes, now imagine yourself walking your daughter down the aisle, except you're sitting in a wheelchair. And you can't even walk anymore. And you look extremely pale. And you're like on death's door with one foot in the grave. Imagine wheeling your daughter down the aisle. You can't even walk with her. Oh. All of a sudden, the cons of smoking cigarettes outweighed the pros. Now, just because it did for that gentleman doesn't mean it will for everybody. It's just the way he viewed his particular relationship with his daughter. He didn't care about his own health. He didn't care that he was going to live 20 years less. He didn't care he couldn't be as active. But that image of himself not being able to literally walk down the aisle with his daughter as she's getting married, that was the con that outweighed the pros. For him to go, I want to quit smoking. Like, not like only want, I need to. Because I care about that more than I care about this. So that's just a little bit about recognizing pros and cons. We want to go into actions. A book I'd recommend if you want to learn more about habit building is called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. It's got a yellow cover. It's interesting. It's worth a read if that's something that you're interested in. Or you can just find a summary on YouTube, like 5 minutes long. The second type of advice that you can give. So the first type was you're giving out options. The second type is, this is everyone's go-to. This is the moment your friend says, like, hey man, I haven't been feeling too well. And people go, well, go dancing. Or go swimming. Swimming always makes me feel better. This is the one where you give direct advice. It's not options. It's not autonomy. It's, look, this is what you need to do. The reason why I saved this one for last is that I feel like it's overused. People use it way too much and there's a lot of errors. Meaning, if I enjoy martial arts and if you say you haven't been active as much, I gotta keep in mind, do you even like martial arts? Would you even be interested in trying? Or you're bummed out. Maybe I love to sing and dance. But maybe you don't like to sing and dance, so should I recommend that? You might like hockey, you might like basketball. So I have to be careful with giving advice that works for me because it's not necessarily going to work for you. And being aware of that, that's the first step. However, if we are at the place where you might get a client, a family member, a friend who says, look, I need your advice. Like, literally tell me what to do. You will get these situations, and the easiest green light is when they literally say that. They look at you and they go, look, I need advice. What should I do? Tell me what I need to do. You'll hear from the tone, it's different between, yeah, I guess like there's a lot of options right now and I'm not really sure which one to follow. You start naming the options. But then if they go, look, I don't know what I'm doing, like I need help. What do you think I should do? If it's in that position, then you could give your direct advice and go, look, if I was in your place, this is what I would do. Now, this is something that we really, really have to understand. Just because we give someone advice doesn't mean they're going to follow it. And we shouldn't take that personally. If you come to me and ask me for advice, and I give it to you, and a week later I see that you haven't taken the advice, there's no need for me to get upset. Just because you give someone something or you teach someone something or you're trying to guide someone a certain way, they're not obligated to follow every word that you say. And that's okay. You did your part. Your part was you were there when they asked for help. You happily gave it without condescension, without sarcasm. But afterwards, what they choose to do with that advice is up to them. They could say, up yours, dude. Or they could follow your advice, take it, and then be hopefully happier and healthier for it. But once we give our advice, there's only so much we can control. When you go to the doctor, he can say, look, you've put on a little bit extra weight. Or vice versa. Look, you really got to put on some weight. Like it's worrisome. Like for your bone density and stuff, with the minerals, vitamins, like you're depleted. You need to eat more. Now you can go up, not literally, but a lot of people, goes in one ear, goes out the other. It's like, yeah, but I don't feel hungry, so I'm just not going to eat. How much more can the doctor do besides telling you, look, this is what I think it should be like? And it's important that we don't hold ourselves accountable too much after the fact, after we've given the advice and the individual has decided not to take it, because there's only so much that you can do. But believe me, from the bottom of my heart, if you've listened to the first episode and to this one, you've gotten so much material, and I hope it's shown you the importance of all the other things besides giving advice. Listening, formulating the problem, understanding someone, hearing them out, giving them the options, diagnosing. I'm going to use that, be careful with the word diagnosis. I just mean correctly identifying the problem. That's more appropriate. I think that you're going to get a lot more out of than just looking someone in the eyes and, okay, this is what you should do. Because the better you identify the problem, the better advice you're going to give. The better questions you ask, the better answers you will receive. And if you lay the foundation, I promise you, like, the advice thing will get a lot more straightforward. Whether it's, do they want advice? Yes or no? No? Perfect. Zip it. Do they want advice? Yes? Perfect. All right. What do they want options and then they want to choose? Or do they want me to tell them this is what they should do step by step? And there's a lot of discretion involved. There's a lot of practice involved. And as always, we're always living, we're always learning, and we're going to discover new things and hopefully help the people in our lives be their happiest and healthiest way possible in whatever way, shape, or form we can. Folks, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode. Stay safe, everybody. Take care of yourselves. I appreciate the support for listening to the podcast, for watching the videos on YouTube. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.